Amy, it's great to be here with you.
Great to be here.
So let's talk about power.
All
You've spent a lot of time encouraging people to act like Wonder Woman, or at least stand like her.
Stand like her.
But do I want to do this in public? Do I want to stand up like this?
No, never. Actually, I shouldn't say never, but the idea of the powerful postures, the really dramatic ones, is that you do that before you walk into a stressful situation, and you do that with privacy, in your office, in a stairwell, in an elevator or a bathroom stall. But that kind of dominant body language, it's preparing your brain for that stressful situation, but in interactions, it's actually it's intimidating the other person. So you don't want to do that in interactions.
Unless I want to intimidate you.
And hopefully you
Which I don't.
Right. So in the actual interaction, what you want to be doing is using open body language, shoulders square, standing with, feet flat on the ground, but also showing that you're engaged and interested in the other people, right? So you don't want to be domineering, because that just shuts people down. You want to be connecting with people. So your body language before can be huge, privately, or with your team, if you're doing it for a sporting event. In the interaction, you just want to be open and sort of strong, and also engaging at the same time.
I like the sound of that.
Thank
So
you.
I have always wondered, you spent a lot of your career, even before that work, studying confidence and worth.
Yes.
And how to project both that you're capable and caring.
Yeah.
And I sometimes worry that when people are power posing, it leads them to come across as very dominant, but makes them less personable and approachable.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think about that?
I do too, and I think that's when people ask me, what's the biggest misunderstanding about your work that bothers you, that's it. And it's when people think that what they're supposed to do is be the alpha and win. And I think first, I don't think of these situations, these big challenges, as things that you have to win. They're things that you need to go to and represent yourself well and accurately and fully, and leave without a sense of regret. So first, it's not about winning. The funny thing is that when we feel confident and powerful, we're better able to reveal who we really are. And that allows us to hear other people. So when we feel confident enough to show people who we are, they feel liberated to show us who they are. So the funny thing about it is that it is the word power, but it's not about power over other people. It's about power over, access to the resources you possess, your best qualities. And when you can do that fearlessly, or maybe you're fearful but you're being brave, then you can hear what other people are saying.
I'd never thought about it that way before, but it almost sounds like what you're trying to do is help people be less insecure so that they can be more other focused.
Yes, I do think it's so much about insecurity. And look, we all are insecure at times. And interestingly, I think one of the most powerful things from the TED Talk was to say to people, everyone feels like an imposter. I mean, for people to know that they're not alone in that, because that's part of the problem. But yes, when we feel insecure, it's very similar to the psychology of powerlessness. And what happens is that it activates what we call the inhibition system. So suddenly we shut down, we feel negative, we feel pessimistic, we feel sad, we don't act when we should act. So we don't stand up for people when we should, we don't share an idea when we should, and we generally just aren't able to be our best selves because we're so worried about what others think of us that we're not showing them a real self. What we really should be doing is managing the impression that we're making on ourselves, not the impression that we're making on others.
I kind of like the sound of that. It's a little bit less terrifying
Yes,
how we normally approach life.
Yeah.
We had this back and forth on Twitter a while ago when I'd been writing a little bit about the power of powerless communication, drawing on Alison Fergel's work, which I think we both know and like. And I was struck that when I studied people who are givers, who are generous and other focused and trying to figure out how they could help, they were speaking in ways that were sort of traditionally powerless. They used lots of, instead of, here's why my idea is important, they'd say, well, here's an idea, what do you think about it? They'd speak with lots of hedges, hesitations, taglines.
Mm-hmm.
They expressed doubt and uncertainty. And I thought that was such an interesting way of saying you don't always have to express power when you communicate. You were not convinced that that was actually powerlessness at
No,
all.
I think it's not. I think it's actually confidence.
What is it?
I call it confidence without arrogance. So it's when people have an idea that they love, they believe in the idea, the core of the idea, but they don't have all the answers and they know they don't. And it's also, so it's about saying to people, honestly, I love this, but I want it to be as good as it can be, so I welcome feedback, even if it's critical. And you know, it's also about being vulnerable, about showing that you don't have all of the answers. And when you do that, others, I think that here's the thing, we think that if we show vulnerability, or that we don't have all the answers, you know, a tiger is going to pounce on us and kill us. And the thing is, that's not...
Do you actually think that?
No.
Okay, good.
I mean, well, I think we think that, but I don't think that. You know, I think that we're rarely in situations that are actually that threatening. I think much more often we're in such situations that are activating the fight or flight response, but that's not the adaptive response, because it causes us either to act out sort of aggressively, but not constructively, or to completely withdraw. So yeah, I think that kind of communication, which is also a lot more about verbal communication instead of nonverbal communication, although there's some nonverbal things in there, I think they're fine. You know, when people say that, oh, you shouldn't have any filler words, or you should never, you know, you should never hedge, or you should never say, well, I think this, I think they're wrong. I think they're wrong. They might be right.
It's so much more powerful when you say it that way, as opposed to saying, they're wrong.
Of course. I mean, because who knows, right? Like, these things evolve, ideas evolve. But I think that when people state things so assertively, it's a sort of old-fashioned way of speaking. It's sort of like, you know, FDR giving an address over the radio, where everything is scripted and it's supposed to be presidential in this old-fashioned way. That's not how we relate today. We relate by actually interacting and having dynamic dialogues.
Like this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We can't predict. I have no idea what you're going to say next.
Neither do I. No, you actually touched on something that I think is fascinating, which is you talked about this idea of fight or flight in response to fear or threat. And I've been wondering recently, is there not a third response, which is instead of fighting or flighting, can you have the response to create? That when you feel fear, when you feel threatened, that's the time to open up, to start thinking about new ideas, to welcome, you know, broader and more diverse insights than you've considered before. I guess, you know, the thing I'm curious about is how do we activate that?
Oh, I love this. Okay, so usually people say fight, flight, or faint.
Mm-hmm.
And faint...
It's a form of flight.
Right, exactly.
Not an effective one.
Exactly. But I kind of think of it as, you know, fight is sort of like, I mean, you've got fear and sadness in these responses. Here's another way of thinking about it. If you become self-aware about your insecurities and the moments that make you insecure, and one of the things that will help you do this is by paying attention to your body language. So when are the moments when you start to roll your shoulders forward and wrap yourself up and speak really quickly and get dry mouth or whatever it is that happens to you? By paying attention to what's doing that, the next time you're in that situation and you start to have those symptoms, say instead, wow, I'm feeling powerless. I don't really have control of this situation, so I'm going to just be open. Anything might happen. So what will happen then is that you reframe a challenge as an opportunity instead of a threat. So I think it's recognizing what makes you scared, in those moments knowing this is happening and saying, all right, this may not be the best outcome, but I'm going to take this as it comes. I'm really going to be present, and maybe something interesting will happen. So that might be a source of creativity.
I like it. In the spirit of that, I've been asking all the questions. What do you want to talk about?
Oh, geez. Well, now I'm on the spot. I would love to talk to you about, you know, I'm really interested in generosity and how presence allows you to be more generous because you don't feel like you are having to cling on to everything, right? You feel safe and you feel grounded. And I think that one of the misunderstandings that people have in the leadership domain is that sort of generosity and compassion are at odds with strength and leadership and decisiveness. And this is a problem that I constantly run into in the classroom. What are your thoughts on that? And how do you teach people that generosity can actually reflect power?
I don't. I just study this stuff. Right? No, I think it's. I mean, to me, it's a signal of power, right? Because when you're willing to share your knowledge or your connections or anything else you have with other people, you're suggesting, look, I don't see the world as zero sum. I don't feel like I'm losing by giving something away. And, you know, I also, by the way, I have enough abundance that I'm willing to share. And, you know, sometimes the conversation stops there and people are like, oh yeah, I never thought about it that way. But I think we've done a really bad job defining leadership only in terms of these sort of very strength-oriented traits that are all about assertiveness and achievement orientation and dominance. And I think we could probably rebrand what it means to be a leader.
Yeah.
I keep going back to Abraham Lincoln, because if you look at what made Lincoln such a great leader, it was not those qualities so much as how compassionate and caring he was. He literally spent 4 hours a day in a typical week doing office hours with regular citizens to hear their concerns. Can you imagine a president doing that today?
No, that's amazing.
And he also, like when we think about the team of rivals idea, that he was able to convert all of his, basically his political enemies to come and join his cabinet when they lost the race to him.
Right.
Yeah, it was by listening, it was by taking a real interest in what other people had to say, and trying to open doors for them. And I think that's what leadership is, and we just need more of those kinds of examples.
Yeah, and to bring them forth. I've got another question for you. So one of the ideas in Originals, which is Adam's really, really wonderful new book, and if people ask me what I'm reading, this is, well, I've already read it, but I'll read it again, because it's so good.
I would say the same, but I read
you.
Presence in the past, and it was wonderful.
No reading Presence in the present. Okay. So one of the things that you talk about is that people who are original thinkers are often risk averse. How do you reconcile that with, the fact that powerlessness makes us risk averse, right? How do these things fit together?
I don't know. I don't feel like I have a good answer to that. I think, like, as I think about it out loud, the first thing that comes to mind is oftentimes what people do is they make themselves feel powerful by avoiding risk in one domain. So they feel safe and secure.
Okay.
And now, when I do have to take a risk, it's not like I'm going to lose everything. So it's like having a stock portfolio, right? Like if you're going to make a stock investment and you're going to make a very risky bet in one domain, then you're supposed to take like a bunch of very boring mutual funds that are guaranteed to do okay. And that way you feel like, all right, I have the courage to take this risk now. And I think we don't tell that part of the story.
So I mean, it's domain specific to some extent, right? You use up your risk in certain areas and you save it in other areas.
Yeah. So the more
conserve it.
Exactly, the more powerful you feel by playing it safe in one domain and knowing that you have some secure successes, the easier it is to then say, I'm going to go out on a limb.
That is really interesting. Okay.
But I think we leave that out of so many narratives of success. Like I keep coming back to the Bill Gates story because it's like, wow, he was so courageous. He was willing to take the risk of dropping out of school and going for broke. And it's like, well, what about the part where he didn't drop out of school? He took a leave of absence and he got financially backed by his parents and he had a year of software sales under his belt. That does not feel very risky anymore.
Right.
But I think a lot of power comes from, I guess the other thought is power comes from being risk averse in the sense that by playing it safe, he was able to build up this track record, right, of interested customers and successes under his belt, and that in turn makes him more comfortable taking a risk and being powerful.
So that has a lot to do with self-awareness too, right? So knowing yourself well enough to know when it is, when you should be cautious and when it's time to launch and actually do something. Another thing that comes up is that you talk about how people who have great ideas have lots and lots of bad ideas. Is it just that people who have great ideas have lots of ideas? Or is there something, is it more interactive than that? So are the bad ideas somehow useful in generating the great ideas?
Oh, that's fascinating. I would have initially said the former. So I think the key to original thinking is variation, right? Generating as many different kinds of ideas as possible. And if you only generate a few, then you're going to miss out on variety because the first few ideas are usually the really conventional ones. And that's why they were easy to think of. And I think that, though, you have a point here, that maybe the more bad ideas you generate, the less afraid of failing you become. And that actually empowers you to try things that have never been considered before. But a lot of people, back to your point about fainting, right? A lot of people get frozen by, saying, like, this idea was terrible and I did fail, or I just imagined failure and it's terrifying. You spent a lot of your career studying emotions. How do you get people to overcome those hesitations?
Oh, jeez, it's really tough. I mean, as I said, I think before, one is just to realize that everyone has those feelings. And it's one of the big misconceptions that we walk around with is thinking that everyone else is confident and we're not confident. So just to realize that if you are human, you're going to have those moments.
Why do we think that, though? We know lots of people who share our doubts. Why do we miss it?
I think the norm is to not share them. And I actually think this is more of a burden on men than on women. It's a burden on women in that it's self-doubt is seen as like a women's problem, right? So it's heaped onto this pile of, oh, here are all the things that women have to overcome to get ahead. But it's a problem for men because men then think, they walk around thinking, am I the only one who has self-doubt? Because my friends and peers are not talking about it. But you all are having self-doubt. And when you can talk about it anonymously, that's what comes out. So I think that when the stakes are high and we really identify with something, we are self-doubting because it's so important to us that we're thinking about all of the possible outcomes and the negative outcomes, they loom large, right? So then we sort of glom onto them and suddenly go, oh my God, what if that happens? What if I'm actually wrong about this thing? So you get into that situation where there's social judgment, and social judgment is like our worst fear. I mean, people talk about public speaking as the greatest fear. I'm not sure that it is everywhere, but it's a great fear because there are lots of people judging you. That's what's so fear-inducing about it. So too is relationship conflict, because there are people who really care about you, who you really love, who are judging you. So I think it's a combination of not knowing that others feel this way, so thinking you're alone in it, which exacerbates it, and then also these high stakes and this social judgment.
I never had quite realized that this is the heart of why public speaking is so terrifying to people, but we've both stumbled into the world of being on stage all the time. I don't think either of us planned for it. We thought we were going to be research psychologists. But I have often noticed that I'm most comfortable in front of a very small audience or a huge audience. Like when the more thousands of people, the better. And I wonder how much of that is just that it's harder to see the faces and you don't worry as much about being judged.
Oh, that's interesting.
Or is part of it also, like, the bigger the audience, the more comfortable a few people feel laughing, and then, they will express whatever they're feeling in response to the talk as opposed to wondering what's appropriate.
You know what? I really wish Susan Cain were here right now because
I do too. I wonder if she'll walk in any second.
I do too. I hope she will walk in at any second. But because I've thought about this a lot, and I actually are you an extrovert or an introvert?
What do you think?
I think you're probably an ambivert.
I'm like somewhere between sociable introvert and ambivert. I never know where to draw the line, but I think I'm probably more introverted. And you're more on the extroverted side, aren't you?
Yes. So for me, actually, but my ideal, enormous audience, totally fine. Mm-hmm. For me, the ideal is that it's a big audience, but I can see their faces. And so I look for people who are nodding and smiling. I call them anchor people. And they don't even really know they're doing
like Ron Burgundy, anchor man?
No, not like that. The other kind of anchor people. They're my anchors. And because I need to feel some intimacy with individuals in this big crowd. So I actually think it really varies across people which situation they find most stressful. Here is my most stressful sort of speaking experience, or that happens to me frequently. Talking to my lab group, which I think is bizarre. Like, they're undergrads who work for me.
They also know you. They're probably not judging you.
Well, no, they want me to be really wise, right? Like, they expect me to be great. And I don't have all the answers, especially in lab group where we're doing research and finding things out. That is so stressful. So that's a small group. I find that incredibly stressful. So 2 to 3 to 4 people, really stressful. One-on-one I like, and big groups I really like. So I don't know. I think that this is sort of interacts with personality.
I wonder if introversion extroversion though is the biggest driver of it, because I used to think that introverts were inherently anxious about public speaking, mm-hmm. and then some mutual friends of ours who are all introverts talked about how they never felt nervous on stage. Barry Schwartz, Malcolm Gladwell, among others, both very introverted, but both totally comfortable in front of an audience. And I guess as I've read more of this research, it seems like another personality trait, emotional stability, reactivity, sometimes called neuroticism. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, how often do you feel anxiety in new or negative situations? That has to interact with introversion, extroversion. So if you're a naturally calm introvert, maybe it's okay to be on stage.
Wait, so it's a 2x2?
It might be. Everything's a 2x2, right?
Everything is. It is. I mean, see, like, even that's a 2x2. You can't see this. I'm sorry, but. Yeah, that's interesting, because I would call myself a neurotic extrovert, and I used to have enormous anxiety about public speaking, and it was because my anxious mind was like ruminating and processing all the time, so it was coming up with new things to worry. It's like in my brain there's a worry vortex, like if there's nothing in it, something will be sucked into this thing. Other people don't walk around feeling that way, so I think it probably does interact with that.
Yeah, I guess as a less neurotic introvert, it doesn't bother me, but it used to, right? It was like as
Yeah.
in an unfamiliar situation.
Yeah.
I didn't know what was going to happen, and I realized
Yeah.
that if I over prepared, it was a lot easier to feel comfortable
Not
going
really
on stage.
scary. I think we might have, you know how in video games there's this thing that they call an Easter egg, which is a special hidden prize in the game. We have the most amazing special Easter egg for you.
Minor miracle that it worked out.
Over here, and you have to sort of squat down.
Hi, Susan Cain.
This is Susan Cain.
Hi.
We love
You
so
two were
much.
so amazing this morning.
Thank
oh my
you.
gosh,
Thank
you were
you.
incredible.
We're being filmed
And
now.
hi.
So, Susan, so you have to sort of squat.
Yeah, if
because
come
we
and
have this
find a
very-
chair here.
Come in here. I hope everyone's still here. And
It's so funny, I came in and I thought, why is Amy talking about Easter eggs?
so
Never know.
if we can still, can we see Susan? All right, Susan.
This
one
is
of
so
the things
timely.
just because I just said, wouldn't it be amazing if Susan Cain walked in right now? Because we were talking about whether introversion and extroversion sort of interacts in some way with what size audience you're comfortable with. Because I was saying, as an extrovert, I love huge audiences, but I also want to be able to see faces. Tiny audiences terrify me.
How tiny? Like,
Oh, like 5 people.
huh.
I find that really, really stressful.
Well, I would say, so for most introverts, I would say the larger the audience gets, the more the discomfort increases. But there is this subset of introverts who are really an exception to that rule, who, and maybe this is you, who are totally comfortable with large audiences,
Yeah.
but just much less comfortable in person. Is that you, Adam Grant?
Often.
Yeah.
You too?
No. No, I mean,
You didn't even hesitate there,
Oh my
Susan.
gosh, you know me. Like, for me, the stage was my big thing that I had to get over. Now I'm okay with it.
Was.
It took me a really long time.
We've
And
been-
I'm much more comfortable with people one-on-one or in small groups where I feel like you can just talk to them as opposed to performing to them. It was the performance aspect that I think freaked me out.
Okay, so
That's the best part of it.
that's
But
interesting.
okay, wait, tell us.
Well, no,
Let's do a bit of-
I'm just thinking of this study that Brian Little introduced in his amazing personality psychology class years ago, where he showed us a graph of the relationship between the number of people that are present in a room and how happy you are, based on whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. And for extroverts, it was just basically like a linear upward, like nirvana is like being at the Super Bowl and just watching the stadium fill. For introverts, a lot of people just think it went downward, but it was actually like a backward check mark, where like really extreme introverts were they were happiest when they were alone or with one person. And then each person made them unhappier until about 5 to 10 people it bottomed out. And then afterward, they started to get a little bit happier again. And it seemed to be that they could hide in the crowd or they could
Well,
pair
that's
off.
the thing.
Right?
Yeah, there's the performing thing, and then there's also the anonymity. Like, people always say to me, how could it be that you love New York City as much as you did? Because I really love
It's a
New York
mystery
City.
to me.
Yes, you
Yeah.
do.
No, but, you know,
But you're
yeah,
anonymous.
you're not, yeah, you have all the energy of all these other people around, and you know you could have an amazing one-on-one conversation at any moment, but you're fundamentally anonymous.
Right, but can you be invisible?
Well, I think the more anonymous you are, it's like an asymptote. So you never get to full invisibility, but you're approaching it.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Susan, do you have any questions for either of us?
Well,
About
before you
what?
ask them, I have a question for you, Susan, which is
okay.
everyone wants to know how you got comfortable with public speaking. That chapter, like I was almost in tears the first time I read about your public speaking anxiety and what you were going through to get on stage, and to know that you're totally calm about it now. What was it that
what happened?
turned you around?
Well, I mean, first of all, I don't want to say totally calm. That would really not be
Relatively calm.
completely accurate. I'm within the normal zone right now of butterflies before I get on stage. But you know, it was really the process of desensitization that you psychologists write about, where you, my goodness, this book.
Don't do it again.
Making me stand up.
And
Yeah, where anything that you're afraid of, it could be the stage, but it could be spiders. You just systematically expose yourself to the thing that you fear, but in really, really, really small doses.
Okay.
So that was the thing.
But
for me.
what if you're afraid of spiders and you go through desensitization, but one bites you, right? So at one point, do you
One
ever
bad
have you
audience.
had a
Yeah.
bad audience, and what happens when that? Well, if that ever
Yeah.
happened,
Well,
does that set you back, or
Yes.
is it okay?
Yeah, no, it does set you back. And I actually some of my phobia is just my innate shyness, but some of it is because of my innate shyness, a terrible experience I had in 8th grade. And it becomes codified in your brain so that your brain is telling you, every time you're near a situation like the one that went so badly the first time, you're saying, get the heck out of there.
Right.
So So that's
stress.
Yeah, and so that's one of the reasons I think it's so important to do it in such small doses where you're pretty likely to have a good experience and not have anything too traumatic happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
You also, though, Susan, you did some degree of flooding, the opposite, right? Because you had not given that many speeches when you went on the TED stage, which is the most stressful stage of all for most people.
Yeah. Well, I hadn't given that many. I mean, I hadn't really given my introversion talk by then, but I had been practicing speaking in general.
And did it feel the same as the practices?
No. I mean, the TED stage, just because of what TED is in our culture, it's like a whole other thing.
For everyone.
Yeah.
Even the greatest celebrities, it makes them nervous.
I know, you said, I saw everyone quaking in their boots back there.
So surprised by how many people were freaking out.
What was it like for you?
I mean, it was...
You just did this recently.
It was...
And you're such a seasoned speaker
Yeah,
by now.
Adam gave a great TED Talk last week.
That remains to be seen. But no, it was... I found it more nerve-wracking in the preparation, knowing that you only have a few minutes and you want to get the best content out there.
Yeah.
And then the actual act of speaking, it's like riding a bike, right? You do it enough times and you can do some of it on autopilot if you know your material.
Yeah, and I
what
think
about the moments before you stepped out onto that little red circle?
Well, I had the good fortune of speaking right after a good friend, Tim Urban,
Yeah.
who gave a hysterically funny and very insightful talk on procrastination. And we'd been practicing together for months beforehand, and he delivered the best version of his talk, and I was so engrossed in flow that I forgot that I was speaking next, and I heard my name. I've got to get on stage. How about the two of you?
Oh my god, I just have to say, only a true giver would have that reaction, because most people would be like, oh my god, I've got to follow him.
No, actually, this is a great way not to be anxious, right? You focus on somebody else's material, and you're not ruminating as much about your own issues.
Well, I have to say, it was a session, I wasn't there to see it, but I keep hearing about it. It was Adam, it was Tim Urban, and our dear friend Brian Little, and people were just raving about the three of you.
That's kind.
Yeah.
What were your experiences like? Amy, what was yours?
I had not had as much, you've been speaking now for a long time. I mean, you're like, 21 or something? How...
You want to just get a few years older so people stop making these jokes.
That's why I lost my hair, actually. I was like, maybe we can accelerate that.
But I had very little speaking experience, so I was terrified. And I was telling a couple things. I was having a gallbladder attack, and I had spent the previous day in the hospital in Edinburgh, and they wouldn't let me out. They wanted to check me in. It was the night before, and my talk was in the morning. And I finally said I was going to pull the IV out. And I told them, sorry, my husband is kind of doing the filming here. He's sitting back here laughing, that he was standing there. And I told them that it was like an Olympic athlete training their whole life for a race, and that you were going to keep them in the hospital because you couldn't get access to the MRI machine. And so I said, I have to do the race. So I went, but I was so scared of having an attack because it's you just double over in pain. I was really nervous. And Jane McGonigal spoke before me, and she is also a fantastic speaker. And it's funny because I started watching her and thinking, and also she was talking about a head injury, and we didn't know that was going to happen. And so she starts speaking, and I'm like, how am I going to follow this? And then I thought, whoa, I can learn so much from this. And I actually watched her thinking, I'm going to learn from this.
Right in the moment. I'm about to go on stage.
Honestly, I thought, even if it doesn't come out now, it's going to come out later. But whoa, what an amazing person. And to see this as a competition is so absurd and so self-destructive. So I'm going to learn from this amazing person who I really admire. So it wasn't quite the same. But it was
good reframing.
I did reframe it, yeah.
Amy, did you know you were going to cry on stage?
It's funny because I had rehearsed it and cried. I didn't.
Not
sorry.
that you were rehearsing the
You didn't rehearse the tears. You rehearsed the speech, and the tears came.
In the dress rehearsal, where I also wore cowboy boots, but I changed that decision. So I couldn't help it. I started crying. I didn't expect to. And they said something like, "Don't worry, you'll work that out." And sort of implying that I wouldn't cry when I actually gave the talk, which
implying that you shouldn't cry.
Sort of, yeah.
I'm saying, don't worry, you won't do that terrible thing.
But it happened. I mean, it's so high stress, and you're revealing something really personal. And I didn't know until the last minute if I was actually going to stop the talk at the end of the research or tell that story. Wow. And it was partly depending on my gallbladder. But so I was so in the moment. The words are coming out of my mouth, and I'm going, "What on earth am I doing? Like, why am I doing this? This is insane. I am going to get so much backlash and nastiness and trolling." And so of course, I mean, all that emotion comes together, and you cry in those moments just from the intensity of the emotion. So no, I didn't. I thought that I wouldn't, and now I'm not sorry that I did. I never could have choreographed it or scripted it, but I think that in the end, it was probably that was how I felt. It was authentic.
Yeah.
And Susan, what was your rehearsal process? Like, what was your routine when you were about to go on stage?
Oh, when I was about to go on stage, God only knows. I think I was just pacing around back there with the backstage makeup people and chatting with them. And I was lucky. You went after Tim Urban, and I went after this incredible band called Red Barat. And they were so good. And they just, they made me feel better. So that was really helpful.
So
that whole behavioral activation system.
Clearly why they were there.
That's why they were there.
Calm me
in
down.
a cosmic way. So speaking of intensity, so you guys are, both of you right now, in the middle of one of the more intense things that ever happens in a person's life, which is book tour. You seem very calm about it, but
The worst is over.
Yeah.
So what's it been like? Maybe you can.
I mean, it's funny. I started my
talk
book
about it
came
from
out.
like what it's like to go through this, because people have heard about the book. What's this experience like?
Yeah, so my book tour started a little bit late because my book came out in December. I was with Susan when it came out, and I was a nervous wreck. We spent like that Christmas together, and poor Susan. Yes, it was ski lodge. And so she had to like watch me checking like Amazon all the time and the New York Times. But so then I had to teach for a couple of weeks, so I started my book tour a little bit late. So we're kind of like Adam and I, like he'll be in a place one week and I'm there the next week or 2 days later. So we're really, it's kind of parallel.
Is this the first time you're literally in the same place?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Since
a long time ago. Yeah.
First time on tour for sure.
Yeah. So it's exhausting and exhilarating.
Yeah.
I mean, because the people who come to hear you speak want to hear you speak. Right?
Yeah.
You're not. It's the most self-selected audience, right? Tailored to your interests and what you love. So they are so happy to be there. I love speaking now, and I love connecting with these people. And then they come through the book line, and they all have these great stories, and I think every one of them is like the greatest person I've ever met. So I want to bond with each of them, and my publicist is like, please stop doing that. You've got to move the line along faster. Like, at first I was like making drawings of everybody. They're like, no, because now I think I've signed probably maybe 8,000 books in the last month. So you can't make sketches of everyone. That's what
I don't think I
learned.
knew this. You're a sketcher? I had no idea.
No, I'm a terrible sketcher. I just thought I had to make everybody in like different power poses and like with their glasses and particular clothing.
You should bring them tattoos instead.
I think it's amazing, and I think it's going to be really hard. Okay, I complain sometimes about how busy my schedule is, but it's an embarrassment of riches. And it's so exhilarating and affirming that when it's over, I think that'll be a little bit tough to come down from. What's your experience?
Yeah, I think there's definitely it's like those days after like a great celebration, like your favorite birthday party, where like then it's over. Like, wait, what am I supposed to do with my time now?
Exactly.
But I found that like doing this the second time it was much more enjoyable than the first time, because the first time
what to expect.
Yeah, like I made all these mistakes, and this time I was like, I'm not going to make any of those mistakes, so I just made different ones.
Like, so wait, what mistakes?
Well, I mean, one big mistake.
Because I'm a first timer here.
I mean, it's too late on some of this, but one thing that I spent a lot of time thinking about was, okay, how do I make sure that I give a different talk in every place so they're unique? And I actually
Wait. You give a different talk in every place?
I tried I had some core content, and then I had some new material for every city.
Okay.
Because I didn't, occasionally people would come to multiple places,
Right.
or, I wanted it to be an authentic experience for everyone. And I realized I was actually doing the audience a disservice, because like they were seeing like my half-baked garbage, right? And it's like, no, develop your best material and then give your best performance. And if you're going to experiment, like the last 10%.
You know what? It's so. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I realized I did the same thing, and I actually had forgotten that I did that, but I did.
See, this is not so unusual, but The other thing I found, Amy and I were talking about this earlier, is just so much more fun to do the in-conversation events where you have a chat like this, and you actually get to learn things and have new insights as opposed to sort of being on stage.
Right.
So that's been more fun.
That is
this
amazing.
time.
And by the way, I feel like we're now just like hanging out having a slumber party. So hi, I hope you're still with us. Thank you for watching us have our slumber party talk. But I do too. So now I've done these Q&As with both, sort of in a way, with both of you. So Susan and I did a 92nd Street Y Q&A that was just honestly like one of the best nights of my life. And I had told her not to tell me many of the questions so that I would be surprised and really be able to give fresh answers, and that was amazing. It's really different from trying to change your talk every time. And now today, you and I had the chance to do this briefly, but with a moderator. And again, it's just so fun to be able to explore these new ideas in real time.
Yeah.
But you do have to have a kind of level of confidence about your material to do that.
That was a really, really great experience.
That was really fun. And I'm going to be interviewing Susan on May 5th at the 92nd Street Y.
Oh, fantastic.
So she will have the book.
Yeah,
and I will be interviewer. Do you want to say anything about that?
Let's put Susan on the spot here.
Yeah, Susan.
About what
tell
the
us
book
what,
is?
Okay, so you wrote the most extraordinary book of 2012, and we're
actually
all
maybe
huge
in the
Quiet fans.
2000s.
So
I didn't want to offend anyone, but there is a new book coming.
Yeah, so it's called Quiet Power, and it's an adaptation of Quiet for a kid and young adult audience, so sort of like the 9 to 12 age range. And I really just, in the wake of Quiet, I kept hearing from people of all different walks of life, and especially from children and their parents and educators. So I felt like we really needed a book that was just for them. So we did a ton of new original research about what life is like in the cafeteria, and among their friendship groups and with their teachers, and it's all in this book.
I mean, that age, it's so important. So I'm so glad.
I mean, that's the hardest age, no matter what.
It
no matter
is.
Who you are.
You would have saved me so much awkwardness.
Yeah.
Going through like elementary and middle
You're not
school.
the only one, which is one of the things I hear all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not the only one who feels this way. And in fact, I've become like the world's confessor for all feelings of social insecurity. And so I can tell you, like, everybody is really insecure. Like,
The two of you and Brene Brown are the target for everyone.
I mean, all these really apparently incredibly fluid and confident people.
That's right.
Yeah.
So back to Adam's question about why do we walk around feeling insecure? Like, why do we all walk around feeling that way? It's because we all think everyone else feels confident and fine, and they don't. They're just hiding it.
I know, and I think, gosh,
But
if it could just become
too.
socially acceptable to just like talk about this,
I think
life
it
would be
is.
so different.
I think it has a little bit more.
I mean, I think like we were here, and here's Nirvana, and we're sort of over here right now.
Yeah.
We're inching along.
But
we are getting there.
Susan and I have talked a little bit about sort of books written by women, nonfiction, that sort of psychology books about courage. And I think that there's a new genre, like in the last 5 to 10 years, where it's not about being fearless. It's about having fears, being open about them, and kind of pushing
and
through
acting
them.
anyway.
And sometimes you fail, and sometimes you don't fail. But I think that I'm so glad that's where it is, because I think that women were trying to be men. They were trying, like, there were all of these strategies that women were supposed to use that would make life easier for them that were just not. They were sort of empty. And I think this is the truth for everyone. We all have fears.
To pretend to be fearless also.
Exactly. So it's
hard to be a man.
It's not a gendered thing. But I'm glad that there are all these books coming out by women who are talking about this, because it's women are receptive to these books by women, right? They feel understood. Really nice new kind of theme that we're seeing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I also want to say, on the subject of the 92nd Street Y, I did not get to attend, but I did watch online your interview at the 92nd Street Y by Malcolm Gladwell, which, if you guys have not watched, you really should go and download it right now. It was so good and hilariously funny.
Thanks.
It was really good.
We had some practice, so Malcolm has kindly come to Penn a couple times in the past few years, and every time I've hosted him, I've tried to look for things to debate about, because it's so much fun to hear how he thinks. And so he was like, all right, it's payback time.
Oh, is that what that was? I was wondering, like, he was giving you such such a hard time. But
Yeah.
I mean, it was all like as friends. But
No,
I was
I
wondering
think
if he always does
he really enjoys intellectual debate, and so do
Yeah.
I, and I
Yeah.
think we're both highly agreeable,
Uh-huh.
and we're comfortable separating, you know, like, do we still like each other from do we actually agree on our
Oh,
opinions?
that's really interesting.
That's an interesting other idea. So, being enjoying debate and also being agreeable.
Mhm.
We think of those things as being at
Yeah.
odds with each other.
They're not.
Because I
Yeah.
don't like conflict. I do think I'm agreeable, but I would like to get to a place where I can have debates and disagree about things. Well, see?
I
How
don't
can
know. I have to
disagree
tell
and be
you,
agreeable?
Amy, I have to tell you. So you might have been happy to do the interview with Malcolm, but when I was watching Adam and Malcolm's interview, I was thinking, wow, my experience with Amy on stage was like another planet for the two of you.
We
It
were
was
having
so
love
funny.
fest, and we were like, let's sit closer and snuggle.
Well, this is also like the inherent like awkwardness of two men having a conversation where they seem to like each other. Like you can't actually admit that, right? So we must show respect by
Oh,
sparring,
yeah,
and then you know
yeah.
who can one up the other. And
Yes, you
it's-
were like straight out of that Deborah Tannen book. You don't understand.
You just
Really?
don't understand. Have you ever read this book?
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
It's been a while.
Yeah, but all about the one-upmanship of male friendship.
Oh,
And I was
yes.
thinking about that as I was
Interesting.
watching your interview.
Yeah, that was not the goal, but it was a fun conversation with lots of
It was
sparks. But
fantastic.
I want to go back to quiet power for a second. So I assume the vision here is not for a bunch of introverted kids to just all find each other and then sit ignoring each other in a room reading.
At the cafeteria table or something, right?
Yeah,
Together.
what is actually the vision for how schools, kids, families will look different with people embracing and understanding introversion?
Well, I mean, the first thing is that what I've seen over and over is that the minute you start to embrace and feel entitled to be who you are, you paradoxically are much more confident in your outward-facing journeys through the world.
Wait, so
I hear this all the time.
like if I realize, okay, I'm an introvert, I become more extroverted without worrying
Well,
about it?
I wouldn't
Or
say
act
become more
more?
extroverted. I would say when you have to be more extroverted or are in that kind of situation, it's easier for you because you're showing up as your full self, and that's empowering.
Is this why I always find it liberating to tell my students that I'm an introvert?
Probably. Yeah. No, that's probably right.
Okay, go on, sorry.
Yeah, so that's kind of the first step, is just getting all these children to accept themselves, but also it's huge to help their parents and teachers understand them as well. And then we're really trying to build a movement around all this stuff. So we're creating a Quiet Schools network that's launching this June, where we're going in to teach a whole coalition of teachers about how to be better teachers to their introverted children. We're building a whole Quiet Ambassadors program, and the vision is to have ambassadors ultimately in every school, every university, every company, who will all be kind of mentoring each other and doing outreach with each other. So we're starting it with LinkedIn also, which I'm going to talk about later today.
I have a question about
Yeah.
that, which is like somebody who's endlessly curious about how we can get our ideas into the world.
Yeah.
Most of us, well, the two of us for sure, right? We just stopped at like writing a book. How did you know that you wanted to turn quiet into a movement and a revolution, and what convinced you to take the leap?
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge thing that, as you know, I struggle with because I really am a writer at
You
heart.
are a writer.
But it was just all the millions of humans who I connected with after Quiet and after the TED Talk, and seeing what a gigantic need there still was, and that it was everywhere. You know, it was with kids, it was with schools, it was with companies, it was with churches, it was like everywhere you look. Excuse me. And so it's just become this labor of love. So even though I'm not really a natural mission builder, it's not my thing.
You are
it's just
now.
something I had to do. Yeah.
Well, with that,
Yes.
we've come to the natural conclusion of this conversation.
And I'm going to have my husband come around just for a minute so that you can see that he's been sort of helping us spell this. Listen, come around.
Wait, and can I actually say hi, because we haven't seen each other since last
This is my husband, Paul.
This is the great Paul.
Paul, thank you for making this live happen.
Thank you so much. Okay.
All right, now press the button.
And he will turn it off very soon.
And thanks to
thank
all
you
of you
so
for
much,
joining us.
and for listening to our just random ramblings.
This is what we do in our spare time.